what are the things we can do to improve individual to individual communication in the hierarchy, direct reporting, and how can we keep people engaged and have both parties understand where the other is at and what's actually happening. So what I'm really going to pitch is this notion of structuring a regular cadence, setting up a regular meeting, weekly, bi-weekly. Can't be any farther out than that. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. And the one I'm a big fan of, become a big fan of, is the 10-10-10. And I'll talk a little bit about why, and I'll talk about a couple other ways to do this. But the key point here is people are remote, or even if they're not remote, if you're socially distanced, right? You don't have accidental conversations anymore. So what is the way that you can figure out what people are really thinking on your team? Also, making sure everybody's aligned with what the priorities are and knowing what's important to those people so that you can make that happen for them so that they stay efficient, happy, and stay where they are with you. So like I said, there's actually, what are we trying to do? What we want to do with people, the same way we do with processes, is we want to plan. And there's normally a 4-step thing here, but I don't want 4 bubbles. So it's plan, do something, measure how it worked out, plan again, do, measure. And I would argue that in a lot of ways, these regular cadence meetings are really the plan and measure, right? And maybe a different diagram will work for this, but that was the idea. So the goal here is to build relationships, not do status meetings. You see this sometimes whenever there's a repeatable cadence, that people just kind of fall in to the ceremony of something, to the ritual of it, right? What we don't want is some kind of ritual that doesn't have meaning, but what we do want is a regular cadence, and we want to account for the fact that people are remote and there are not accidental conversations, right? So the 3 ways I'm going to talk about doing this, the one I have the most experience with is a 10-10-10, although I have used the urgent important one in a sales group. So in the 10-10-10, it's basically a 30-minute meeting on a regular cadence, 10 minutes for the report, 10 minutes by the manager, kind of what's not status, but like where issues have happened and what their blockers and what are their goals. I'll talk about this in more detail. And then 10 minutes at the end for what's going to happen between now and the next time we meet. The other way, second one of these plans, and the goal here is to provide a structure so it's not a random social meeting, right? Or a beat down or something else. This is Eisenhower's urgent important. I actually found this one online and I've used a variant of this before, so we'll talk a little bit about that. It's basically bucketing everything people are working on or what needs to be done into a grid, and then working those in the order that the grid implies, and delegating or passing stuff off for some of the others. The last one is a list comparison. This is actually out of Google, somebody at Google, I forgot who. I've never actually used it. I've kind of seen things like it before, but I'm going to cover it anyway because I thought it would be a good idea to come up with 3 of these, and it was kind of an interesting. So the goal here is to create a structure for the discussion, stay on purpose, and use kind of these little hints or tools or whatever, crutches to make this thing work better. So the 30-minute with the 10-10-10 is the one I've had some experience with, and generally speaking, I like it. It's short. Some people complain about a 10-10-10 because it's 30 minutes. They don't think you can get anything done in 30 minutes. You could lengthen this thing out, or you could hold the meetings at a more often cadence, right? So that you don't have less to cover. The typical thing, the longer the time window, the more you got to cover. So the first 10 minutes usually, or you can do it in any order, but is usually by the team member. And it's like kind of what's important to them, what things have been hard, what things do they need to do. There might be personal and professional in their team and personal. I'd like to move up. I'd like to do these things. I'd like to learn these skills. The manager then does the same thing. They basically talk about kind of how they see things are currently happening, what they think priorities may have been messed up or other things, or how they're good. And so that's by the management. So 10 minutes where the person gets to talk, 10 minutes where the management gets to talk, and then 10 minutes at the end to discuss what priorities are for the next week. Hey, to solve or make these things work in the previous 2 10s, what do we need to do in the next week or the next period? Because it may actually be every other week. Depends how many reports you got and how often you can make this thing happen. I am a big fan of this. People can get forgotten, and you'll see that even more when you're working remote. This one is the kind of, they call it the Eisenhower model, but I like this. And I've flipped it around a little bit because like culturally, I think we do important and urgent and all that kind of stuff in the upper right now, like when you see a curve and it's going up. The point here is we have two axes, important and urgency. People put everything they're thinking about into one of the four boxes, maybe half of 4 or 5 items of each one, manager and the person. Important and urgent things really need to happen that day or the next day or the next couple days, right? And so everybody's on the same page. They know what needs to be worked. And then you've got kind of the weird other axis, which is important but not urgent. Something might be scheduled. You've got things that are urgent, but they're not crazy important, but they got to get done. So maybe you'll delegate those off because maybe they're not important to the two of you, but it's got to be done for somebody else. So the goal here is start in the upper right corner, then move down. The last one is if it's not important, it's not urgent. Those are just tracking tasks at that point. They might become important in the future and you don't want to be blindsided. But generally speaking, if you have a high utility rate, then you're never going to get to the bottom till they move to another grid. And I like this one too. The last one is the kind of Google thing, and it's basically the manager with the top 5, and the report makes top 5. And I put this 10-10 because I figure it's like 10 minutes to talk about what each of your top 5s are. And you can do this in different categories. You know, like I'm going to pick out my top 5, and one of them's got to be out of each of the boxes below. And then the idea is you look at those two lists, and if wherever they line up, both of you agree, those things have to be worked. And then you got to look at the other things and decide if the list needs to be shuffled around so that both of you agree on some extra ones. I like this, but I haven't used it anywhere. I could totally see this in different situations, but like I said, and there's a link here that describes where people have used this. So this goal here is really to compare and align priorities. And so it's kind of interesting. So that was the 3 of them, right? Like I said, I've got the most experience with the 10-10-10, and I've used a version of the Eisenhower before. Try it. The last thing pretty much here is this may not be perfect. There is sometimes the law of unintended consequences, which is, hey, we get along fine while I'm remote, or you two are remote from each other. But when we start working together, we realize we're not on the same page in some way, personally or professionally, about how this should be working. That's a little bit of a risk. Sometimes people will realize they can work it out, which is what you hope, because you don't want to lose value, and diversity is usually pretty good. And sometimes people will decide they want to work on a different team, or they want to work in a slightly different setting. And that's good too, because then nobody's blindsided. So there's a positive to all of that. What the other risk that can be, this is an empty ceremony. We meet every other week and nothing ever changes. Got to make sure that this just doesn't happen that way. And then the other one that gets me a lot of times is if it gets canceled. I worked for somebody and 75% of our meetings got canceled. To me, that said they did not think this was important at all, or I wasn't important and it wasn't worth it. So if you're going to set this up, stick with it for 3 to 6 months and see if it works out. Pick a time period where you will not cancel meetings, or you guarantee that if some meetings gets canceled, that it gets redone within that same time window so that they're not skipped. Otherwise, nobody believes you're serious about it. So these are just some minor things about it. I would, just take it into account. There's probably some other negatives, but like I said, I think this is pretty value. Here are the usual Google links, because I got most of these from Google. I kind of curated them a little bit, so I thought they were interesting. So what's the idea here? Don't lose touch. People are working remote, or they're distant, or the offices are more spread out. There's a lot of distributed work being done, and I apologize for people that aren't allowed to do that and have to be totally on top of each other all the time. Some of these will apply to that too, but the place I've really seen, in fact, all this applies to that. The only reason I bring this up is it becomes harder the more distant people are, and if people don't have a structure, they can get lost even more so than in person, right? So don't lose touch. Maintain the connection between a person and the person they work for, or a person and the person that work for them. And the goal here is to create regular expectations about both what you're going to do in the meeting and what comes out of that meeting, and will it be acted on, and maintain a regular cadence. And the hard part of this is maintaining a cadence over a long period of time, right? There's a reason you do it in the beginning. It's to get something spun up, and there's a reason you should stick with it. Maintain the cadence. That's all I got. I hope that was useful.